Howdy, it's Kyle talking about the most needed interstate projects in the U.S. I do a lot of cross-country road tripping on interstates, but also on state highways and back roads, and I can say for sure that there are parts of the country that are not well served by an efficient means of moving traffic over large distances. And in this video, I'm going to take a look at the parts of the country that really need to beef up its traffic corridor based on population and traffic increases. Back when the interstate system first started in the 1950s and 60s, there was a disproportionate amount of the population in the Northeast and Midwest, and that's where you have a disproportionate amount of the interstate lanes. But in the past 50 to 70 years, there's been a big population shift south and west to the parts of the country that aren't as well served by the interstate network. And also, many cities are much larger today than they were 50 to 70 years ago, and many more people need to get to and from those places, and perhaps the corridor connecting these places isn't really adequate to handle all the traffic. So I'm going to look at some major projects that we need right now, not a round number and not a countdown, just some of the most needed interstate projects in the U.S. I'm going to start along the East Coast and the route that connects Virginia Beach to Charleston, South Carolina. This route is about 450 miles, and the shortest way to connect them right now is about 7 hours. But you see that longer route that takes 7 hours and 40 minutes, that's mostly back roads, and if that were freeway, it would be about 6.25 hours, so going out of the way adds well over an hour to this trip. The portions in the southeasternmost corner of Virginia and the northeasternmost corner of North Carolina are currently being transformed into Interstate 87, but once you get a decent amount into North Carolina, it just turns back into regular US Highway 17. Parts of this route are 4-lane highway, and it's even a freeway going through the towns of New Bern, Jacksonville, and Wilmington, North Carolina, as well as Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and portions of the Charleston metro area. But most of the 4-lane highway areas are not freeway and have occasional stoplights when you go through towns. And there's also a decent stretch in North Carolina between Williamston and New Bern where it's just a 2-lane highway. There's been a lot of population growth in eastern North Carolina as well as coastal South Carolina, and there really needs to be a better route to connect these areas. Part of the issue in this part of the country is that I-95 is the main north-south interstate through the eastern part of the country, but when you get through North and South Carolina, it doesn't go through where the towns are. So if you've driven I-95 all the way up and down the coast, you know when you go through the Carolinas, you don't go through any of the big cities of those states. Most of the people in the Carolinas live along the I-85 corridor or along the coast, which is this route, the US Highway 17 route. I want to use discussing that route as a segue into discussing this next route that I think needs to be upgraded to a freeway. This one primarily would use the US 29 corridor through Virginia, what might be the future Interstate 73 through North Carolina, and then various back roads all the way to, again, Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. And so this route isn't important because of Charlottesville, but anywhere north and east of there, getting down to the Carolina coast, instead of using I-95, this will be an alternate way. Currently, there are 3 main routes to get from Charlottesville down to Myrtle Beach, or essentially anywhere north of Charlottesville, like DC, or up farther on I-95 down to Myrtle Beach, or anywhere along the coast south of there. So it takes about 6.25 hours to take this route using the interstate, but the more direct routes take longer because you're a lot of it on back roads. If those grayed out routes were freeways, then this route would only take 5.5 hours, so going out of the way adds about 45 minutes. I-95 doesn't go through Raleigh, so you have to go a little bit out of the way to do it, and the new I-87 will connect the two. But if where you have to go after Raleigh is more coastal as opposed to Piedmont and Mountain, then you really had to go out of the way to get to Raleigh in the first place. I've driven through North Carolina a lot recently, and the interstates are crowded right now. So if some of these more important direct routes between major urban centers were improved, you would get some of those people off of those other routes that people are having to use because they're going out of the way because the way they want to use isn't a freeway. And the third needed project that I want to talk about in this part of the country is for an existing interstate that really needs to be upgraded. That's I-81 through Virginia. This is my single least favorite interstate drive in the entire country. I hate having to go this way. And to give you an idea of just how much I hate driving along I-81 in Virginia, the last time I was driving from the northeast to Chattanooga, when I got to Hagerstown, Maryland, I went more than an hour and a half out of the way just to avoid that stretch through Virginia. And the reason why I hate I-81 so much is that there isn't anywhere near enough lane capacity to handle all the traffic. It's essentially a 4-lane interstate throughout the entire state, but it really needs to be at least 6 lanes. And driving through here is just awful and stressful. Almost the entire way, you're going to be in freeway speed, but really tight congestion. Look at the cars in these photos. They're all at least 10, 15 years old. These are old photos, and even when these were taken, this road really needed to be at least 6 lanes. The first time I drove this route over 20 years ago, I was like, wow, this really needs to be widened. Essentially, every mainline interstate in the eastern half of the US really needs to be 6 lanes, not 4 lanes. There needs to be a way so that a faster moving big rig can pass a slower moving one, but then regular speed traffic can pass the faster moving big rig. The last time I was on I-81, I was in the left lane for over 1 hour. And I'm not a left lane driver either. It was just so much congestion on the road, you just couldn't get into the right lane. And what really frustrates me about this is that Virginia won't do anything about this unless it's paid for with federal funds. And Virginia is the bridge between the North and the South, and people are moving a lot between the two, and you really need better roads in this bridge area. So Virginia really has to step up its game, because you want to be a big time player in the US, you got to have big time roads that can handle the big time traffic. But for me, I-81 is a nightmare, and I have no issues whatsoever going way out of the way to avoid it. Next up, I want to go over to Texas, where there are a few more major projects needed. The first is a very important route that connects Dallas to Denver. Ask a long-haul trucker how you get from Dallas to Denver, and they'll probably go, oh, don't get me started on that. If you were to look at the most direct route between any two major metros in the US, between Denver and Dallas, this is the one that requires the most off-interstate driving. As it stands now, it takes between 12 and 12 and a half hours to get between Dallas and Denver. However, if this route were to be upgraded to interstate standards, the travel time would be reduced to under 11 hours. So it could save anywhere between an hour and an hour and a half travel time between these two. The big problem stretch here is between Amarillo and Fort Worth. This primarily parallels US Highway 287, and it goes through all kinds of towns, and there's been a lot of population growth, especially as you get closer and closer to Fort Worth. Now thankfully this route is a freeway through the largest cities in the area, including Wichita Falls and Bowie. But a good majority of it is just regular 4-lane highway, a lot of cross traffic, a lot of stoplights, and some pretty dangerous situations as well. And as big as Dallas and Denver are, it isn't just about connecting Dallas and Denver, it's about anywhere north and west of Denver to anywhere south and east of Dallas. And I've driven this route so many times, it's just really annoying to have to go through all these towns and sit at all these stoplights, and because trucks are having to use these small streets as well, it makes it even slower. And this is just one of many routes I think in Texas really needs to be beefed up with so many more people moving there. The second one is the route that connects Houston to Austin. As you can see, there are two different ways that are about the same distance and about the same time. However, the majority of both of these is not freeway. US 290 is a 4-lane highway all the way between Austin and Houston, but nowhere is it a freeway. A lot of towns, a lot of stoplights, a lot of cross traffic. The other route that follows Interstate 10 and State Highway 71 has a small freeway that goes around the town of LaGrange, so you can avoid the shack outside of town. But this way too, a lot of stoplights, a lot of towns, a lot of cross traffic. If it would be freeway entirely connecting these two cities, it would take about 2.5 hours, but it would also make for much safer driving conditions. At the rate that Texas is growing, and especially these two metro areas, these roads connecting the two just aren't sufficient. And the third one for Texas I want to discuss is how you would get from Dallas-Fort Worth area to Las Cruces, New Mexico, and points west. So currently as it is, you have to follow Interstate 20 and 10 and go pretty far out of the way going through El Paso and then up to Las Cruces. But that's about 500 miles and adds 30 miles from the most direct route. But not only would you be saving a half an hour and 30 miles, you would also be avoiding a Border Patrol checkpoint. And there's a Border Patrol checkpoint on Interstate 10, and they will stop every single car as you go through it. They'll ask you some questions, they're going to walk a drug-sniffing dog around your car. It's super annoying, and at certain times of the day or year, there might be a long line of people. You might be waiting for a long time to go through this checkpoint. So having a freeway that can avoid all this would really help with all the truck traffic going along I-10. And it would also get all those cars that don't want to really go to the border from having to go through a Border Patrol checkpoint. And if fewer cars are having to go through the Border Patrol checkpoint, the checkpoints themselves will be more efficient. And this is another part of the country in which I've driven around many times, and it's just not very efficient to get from Dallas to some of these points to the west. Moving over into the middle of the country, I want to take a look at this route that would connect Des Moines, Iowa to Memphis, Tennessee. Currently, you have to go about 600 miles or so, and it takes about 9.5 hours. But if you were able to take an interstate freeway the entire route, it would take about 8.75 hours. So it would save about 45 minutes or so of time. And the other thing about the inefficiency of this route is by going out of the way, you would have to go through either Kansas City or St. Louis. If you were able to connect these two routes more efficiently, you would be able to avoid both of those large metros. Well, who's going from Des Moines to Memphis? That can't be that important of a route. But this is another case of it's not just about Des Moines, it's about anywhere north and west of Des Moines, as well as anywhere south and east of Memphis. And the main route that I'm talking about here is the US 63 corridor through the south central parts of Iowa, throughout basically all of Missouri and in northeastern Arkansas. And for Missouri, this is known as the deadliest road in the state. In the portions in northern Missouri, it's mostly a 4-lane highway, although it does have a lot of cross streets and stoplights as you go through towns. And as unsafe as that is, it gets really hairy once you get into the southern parts of the state. In southeastern Missouri, US 63 is a 2-lane highway, and it's mostly pretty windy as well. And whenever you have a windy 2-lane highway, you get people that are really impatient, get behind a slow car and try to pass, and they might not be able to see around that corner. I know this is all high school driver's ed kind of stuff, but still, this is what happens. And things don't get any better when you cross over the border into Arkansas. In fact, the first parts of US 63, the northern parts of Arkansas, are even more dangerous than the parts of Missouri. However, the really dangerous stretches in Arkansas are fairly small. So this is a route that not only would reduce a lot of time, but it would also make things a lot safer, and it would also reduce traffic going through both Kansas City and St. Louis. It's a win-win-win. Staying in this part of the country, I want to look at this route that would connect Springfield, Missouri to Jackson, Mississippi. So currently, as it stands, it's about 475 to 500 miles and takes about 8 hours. However, if this were to be a freeway, it would take about 7 hours. And it's interesting is one of the routes you could take to connect these two would include part of what I was talking about in the previous route. But mainly what I'm looking in Arkansas is the US 65 corridor, not 63. This is a pretty windy highway, none of it's freeway, and a lot of it's only 2-lane. You have some more of those dangerous windy 2-lane stretches with people trying to pass. So the portions of this route in northwestern Arkansas are the worst ones, but as you get to Conway, going through the Little Rock metro area and onto Pine Bluff, it is an interstate. But once you get southeast of Pine Bluff, going down to Jackson, you're back onto 4-lane highways, a lot of cross streets, a lot of towns, a lot of stoplights. So this is another area where it's very slow going, but it is a very important transportation corridor. And you can see just how far out of the way you would have to go if you want to stay only on interstates. You have to add about 200 miles to your trip. So you look at some of these states where I think you need major road improvements: Texas, Missouri, Arkansas. What do all three of those have in common? They're right in the middle of the country. And with the population of the country generally shifting south, the states in the southern parts of the middle of the country are seeing a lot more traffic. And specifically in the case of Arkansas, it doesn't really help, but the state really doesn't have a good track record with rural roads and improving some of the roads to freeways. Next, I want to talk about a relatively short stretch, but really needs to be upgraded to interstate standards. And this is portions of US Highway 6 going through Utah. Currently, it's about 520 miles between the two. It takes about 8 hours to do the drive. If this stretch of US Highway 6 in Utah were improved, the travel time would be reduced by half an hour to 7.5 hours. But it isn't just time saving, this is another stretch where the road is very dangerous. Almost all of this route is 2-lane highway with an occasional passing lane. There is a freeway bypass around the town of Price, but most of the rest of this route is just a windy 2-lane highway. You go over a relatively high mountain pass, and during the winter this might be difficult to pass over. This is the type of road that 30 years ago or so would have been a very desolate road with very little traffic. However, with so much population growth in both Colorado and Utah, this route has become much more busy. So this route I think is more about safety than time, although you would save about a half an hour of time just going from Denver to Salt Lake. And the last route that I want to talk about in this video is going from northwest to southeast Ohio. So basically I'm looking at Toledo to Parkersburg, West Virginia, going through Columbus. Currently, it's about 250 to 280 miles and takes about 4 hours or so to do the drive. If this were upgraded to full freeway status, it would take about 3.5 hours. From Toledo south to Findlay, it's Interstate 75, but from Findlay to Columbus, it's US 23. Most of this stretch is 4-lane freeway, and it isn't that bad, but once you get to the northern Columbus suburbs, it turns into a regular 4-lane highway and a bit of a traffic nightmare. And then to continue on in this direction, you would go along the freeways through Columbus, but once you get southeast of Columbus, you're back onto a regular kind of 4-lane highway. Kind of like north of Columbus, it is a freeway through many other towns, but once you get past Athens, the college town, it really gets kind of weird. From here, the most direct route for where most people want to be going is to go south on US 33 on into Ravenswood, West Virginia. But this is mostly windy 2-lane highway going through a couple of towns. I think they are trying to upgrade this road, but right now it is kind of a small windy road you take. The other way is the 4-lane highway US 50 all the way into Parkersburg, but this is a little out of the way unless you're going to Parkersburg itself. And so right now you have Interstate 71 that goes northeast to southwest across the state, going through Cleveland, Columbus, and Cincinnati. And although those are the three main urban centers of the state, there's nothing that goes from the northwest to the southeast part of the state efficiently. Columbus has grown a lot, which has added a lot of traffic to the interstates there, and more people are coming from other parts going to and through Columbus. For the most part, I would say Ohio does a pretty good job of having adequate roads to handle the traffic situations for that particular area, but this is one that really do think needs to be beefed up. So that's my look at the most needed interstate projects in the U.S., and these are all very important projects. They're all very important to the economy. Time is money, and a lot of time is wasted in inefficient traffic movement, and also some of these really inefficient roads are just very dangerous. So from a safety perspective and from a time perspective, we really need to beef up the interstates. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give me a thumbs up to let me know you approve, and subscribe to this channel if you're interested in learning more about geography. I'm talking about road tripping like this, talking about cities and states and ranking things, and I'm a bit of a nerd, so everything comes from a nerdy perspective. But yeah, thanks for watching. Geography King, signing out. I'd like to give a special thanks to my superior patrons for their support, especially K Casa. If you're interested in buying a pin for the viewer pin map or just to support the channel, check out my Patreon page, link in the description. And as always, thank you very much.